Hey guys, my guest today is Ridwan Olalere, co-founder and CEO of LemFi, the remittance platform simplifying cross-border payments for millions. Before LemFi, Ridwan led operations at OPay, one of Africa's fastest growing fintechs. Since launching them, raised a couple of millions, expanded globally, and are reshaping how money moves across borders. Today, we dive into hyper-growth strategies, regulatory playbooks, and what's next for the fintech in emerging markets. Hi, Ridwan. How are you doing today?
Hi, Tiger. How you doing?
I'm good. It's Stitch, by the way.
Yeah. You know what? I realized that you corrected me before, and I'm like,
Yeah,
oh
it is
shit.
fine. I'm glad to have you here and big fan of what you're doing with LemFi. I think just a little bit of backstory, what was the aha moments that led you to starting LemFi?
Thanks, Stage. You know what? I don't think there was any aha moment really. It was pandemic. I'd left OPay. I was working at Uber. I think you know what? Before that, a couple years before that, I started a couple of things. Best Prices, which was a price comparison website. And then another job search platform. I just don't remember the name now. I just kind of don't remember, which is basically the Indeed for Africa at the time, or for Nigeria to be specific, right? So it was a search engine to aggregate all the job listing platforms like Jobberman and the rest. So I had the inclination to want to start something, right? That happened to me many times. And so fortunately, the pandemic shutdown gave me the opportunity to rethink, right? And then at the time I was a bit financially better. I saved a lot at my previous jobs at OPay and at Uber. And then I gained a bit more experience and was a bit more confident in how to go about doing it. And so I just spent a lot of my free time putting the plan together.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's this popular saying, I won't say it's popular per se, but I think it's in Nigeria where they're like, it's only when you've eaten that you can build a startup. I mean, it just corrects what you said about when you're like more financially stable and you could just sit back and look into, okay, what I wanted to do next after a couple of projects that didn't work out. You mentioned OPay, right? Being part of, OPay and Uber. OPay being like a fintech, right? And also like being part of the explosive growth that it saw before you left. What particular lessons did you bring from there to launching LemFi?
I think OP was the springboard for everything we did at LemFi, honestly. I mean, I've had so many other experiences that, contributed in different ways to LemFi itself. There was the experience of Flutterwave, and there was experience with Hotels and Energy. Those were like the significant experiences in my career. But then there was the experience at OPay, right? And I have to share a bit more context for this to be a lot clearer as to why that was the most significant one. The first set of people that was hired in Nigeria by the Opera software team, right, for the OPay business was Digbo and myself, right? Digbo was a guy that was going to lead business partnerships, and I was supposed to do products. But I was an engineer at the time. I was a software engineer at Flutterwave, writing code for payment products, not a product manager. But I mean, in the team that I led up Flutterwave, I dabbled with products. But here was a team saying, we're hiring you not because we want you to write code. It was mostly because we just want you to build our business plan for us, and we want to do payments, right? And so it was starting from zero. This was the opportunity to start something from zero. But at Flutterwave, even though I was there very much in the early days of Flutterwave, right? I wasn't senior enough to have access to so many things like P&Ls, business operation, mode, strategy, execution, flaws, so many things that I wasn't privy to at Flutterwave, right? But at OPay, I was a director, so I had visibility into the entire plan. In fact, I was asked to build the plan, which is kind of interesting, which is a different
It
challenge. It's
is
like,
actually.
hey, build the plan for what it should be. We know we want to
So
do
wait,
payments.
it was you that had the whole idea for, I mean, you and Digbo that had the idea of, using, what's it called, ride hailing and all those other
No,
services to
there's
tap
multiple
into
stages.
financial
Not
services.
really. There were multiple
Okay.
stages in the life of OPay. There was the
Okay.
stage zero, when it was just the Opera software team, which was only known for building browser companies, setting up the team in Nigeria, right? And they did not have a clue what they wanted to do, other than the fact that it had to be payments. Initially, they thought they could build a Flutterwave or Paystack competitor, right?
I see.
So there was a retreat, I can remember in January 2017, 2018, 2018. There was a retreat in Nairobi where everyone they had hired across Africa and the team in Sweden, because a lot of the engineering team for Opera Software was in Sweden at the time. And the management, general counsel, VP of mobile, were in Oslo, Norway. Everyone was in Nairobi for a session, and each director had to present. So as the director for the payment business, I had to present the strategy, what we were going to do, and I had to even do a simpler forecast as to where the business would be in 12 months. And that was the goal I had. And so in the first 6 months, we tried to build a duplicate of stack of Flutterwave, right? But we got a lot of things wrong then. We tried to do it in a way that was similar to Stripe from a technical integration perspective, not even from an experience perspective or checkout experience perspective, because from a technical integration perspective. And that kept being a bottleneck. And because we layered ourselves on top of Paystack of Flutterwave, it also added extra bottleneck. We're wearing PCI DSS certified, so that meant there were a lot of other things we couldn't achieve with that integration.
Okay.
And so, and when you think about B2B, sales cycle of B2B is a much longer. And when you
What
think
is it?
about B2B in a very competitive market where there was Paystack and Flutterwave at the prime of their era, right? It was even so much more competitive, right? And so 6 months into it, this was my first job as a director. I didn't want to lose it. I was like, this has to happen. And there wasn't, also when you think about building a payment gateway, you need technical resource. And there wasn't a lot of technical resource attached to us in Nigeria then because it was also kicking off in Kenya at the time. A lot of people don't know
Okay.
this. OPay started in both
Yeah,
Nigeria and Kenya together. It's that
that's
Kenya
interesting.
lost track and got shut down. And we made
Was
it.
that where they had the Okash thing?
That was when they now later had Okash. When OPay couldn't kick off in Kenya, they then set up a separate company called Okash, which was supposed to be the lending one. And then eventually that got shut down as well. So we then, we didn't have a lot of resources because when you think about it, when Nigeria didn't get a lot of resources because everyone in Sweden and Norway thought Kenya was the easier place to do business and Kenya was the better place to do business. And of course, it is relatively just as easy as Nigeria, right? They're both easy to do business. They're easier now to do business. Let me say that way, relative to like what they were 5-6 years ago. There's still so much progress to be made, but there is significant progress that's been made by both regulators. And so we didn't have a lot of resources. But then when you think about resource constraints, when you think about a longer developing cycle for merchants, right? And when you think about the landscape of your competition, right? It made it significantly more difficult to make progress in payment gateway. And so one day, I reached out to VP of mobile, Nuno, which was the person I reported to at the time. Nuno sits in Norway. He was like he was as well the CEO of business, OPay, at the time. And everyone in Africa reported to Nuno. And Nuno reported to the chairman. And so, I reached out to him and I said, this gateway thing isn't working. We're not figuring it out. Can we go into the agent banking business, right? And by this time, the acquisition of Paycom Nigeria Limited was getting completed. So for people who don't know today, we were hired before the acquisition was done. And so the first task was to get the agent business right. So we got it right. By the January of the next year, we had 50,000 agents that were active, not 50,000 signups, 50,000 active agents. And at the time, what you need to know is that the biggest player in that space at that time was Paga. And Paga only had 20 something thousand agents in all of its 9 years. So there was an internet bra, right? And so at that same period, there was a meeting, a board meeting in Beijing. Because what happens is that the group that owns Opera software browser also own like a bunch of other internet assets. And so the leaders of the different subsidiaries would assemble in Beijing to give the report of their business, right? And so Nuno knew that because the product was growing, it was going to get the attention of the chairman. So he asked me to put the reports together and the going forward business plan for OPay to go and present in Beijing, right? Because if you do the work, you should get the credit for it.
Yeah.
And so the Nigerian thing happened to me where I couldn't get a visa on time to travel to Beijing. Yeah. And a guy called Danvi, who was supposed to start off OPay in South Africa, that never happened, took the presentation and went to present in Beijing on my behalf, but without mentioning me, right? And
no way.
Yeah, and so Beijing thought Danvi had built the thing, sent him back, and immediately sent a bunch of Chinese to Lagos because this was now an exciting project that showed tremendous potentials, right?
Growth, yeah, potential. Yeah.
And the next thing, the chairman did it because in the beginning, it was being funded by Opera Software. So Opera Software was the one that was funding it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if he was showing potential, the chairman does this thing as the beneficiary of the group itself. Raised, I think $50 million was the first batch of money for OPay. But you have to remember, the chairman is a prominent internet entrepreneur in China.
Yeah.
So he could raise money easily, and he sent his army straight to Lagos to come and work with the team to kind of scale it. And then he took it from there and scaled it to, I think the next benchmark was like 100,000, 200,000 agents.
Agents, yeah.
And this is where everything then started, and people then started to know OPay at the time. And the guy who came around to do that was a guy called Alan Chu, right? So Alan Chu came in, much smarter guy. I liked him, he was brilliant. And I was like, oh, this is a great guy. So I started working with Alan Chu. Everybody, including Danvi and the rest were working for Alan Chu. Danvi, who presented in Beijing, when he got back, he was asked to launch O-Food. But remember,
in Lagos
was
or in
my plan.
South Africa?
It was in Lagos, because now South Africa was not happening. Lagos had shown tremendous progress. So everyone should focus on Lagos. So he was sent back to Lagos to launch O-Food on the same platform, right? The engineering at the time was still in Sweden for OPay. And the support engineering and the local integration was in Lagos, headed by Dotson, right? And another guy in Sweden, and they reported to the guy in Sweden. And so in that period, the company was scaling super fast. There were a couple of mistakes that happened in the technical decision process. So Beijing decided to move the engineering from Sweden straight to Beijing. It wasn't well done. They hijacked the entire thing from the Swedish team. They were not happy. They were kind of like disconnected from the team and moved to a gaming business under Opera. We then started working with a lot more Chinese people. And the guy who then scaled from 50 to 100,000, 200,000, working with us, but made all the ultimate decisions at the time was Alan Chu, then decided that it made sense because he was there in Lagos with us. It made sense to launch Alright. So it was his decision. Come around, we're going out around in the market to do some surveys, and he saw the green Okada, which was Gokada at the time. And it was like, what's going on? We're like, yeah, there's a Gokada thing. I was like, really? It goes back to Beijing, convinces the chairman that it could be used as a massive acquisition channel. Because if you remember in Indonesia, there was Gojek. And Gojek did a similar thing. Gojek used ride-hailing, low-cost ride-hailing to acquire so many customers to build a super app for the entire country. And I think, which is very, very interesting, the chairman was also a previous investor, either in Gojek or in a fund that invested in Gojek.
Gojek, I see. So
the
idea was from...
So he had all the updates of Gojek to see how it became really big. He compared the population of Indonesia to, right? Indonesia is about 284 million people-ish, 300 million people-ish. Nigeria was like on the internet, 200 million people. Yeah. So it was like, oh, very close. This could be done. And just Nigeria could become $1 billion company. And so now the race started. And so in 1 week, Alan said we should buy all the Okadas. We bought all the Okadas in Lagos, the 300 horsepower or whatever. And the game started, right? It
But
was,
that's
it was just
interesting.
stressful. Yeah, it was stressful. The fact that part of I did so many things. I had to be removed away from being the director of payments to becoming the director of operations for All Right. Because payments was doing okay.
Mhm.
We had a bunch of people there, so we could let it go.
How does Ryan come into all this?
So Rand was always the one in Norway that managed all the financials of OPay,
I see.
right? So remember, it was the Chinese were never in the picture in the beginning until 2019, end
When
of
the presentation thing
2018,
happened.
when the presentation happened. So this was after 50,000 agents, right? And so the Chinese then became a huge part of the picture from 2019 till today, right? So Alan and I then managed All Right, and it was like 18 cities doing millions of trips per week. Maybe at one point, I think Ibadan was even doing 1 million trips.
Yeah,
a week.
it was actually a very
Oh,
fantastic business, if I
what I
remember
don't even
correctly.
remember, but I'm sure there was a time it was more than 1 million trips a week, the entire country.
So it was
The entire
the
country.
government decision to ban Okadas that shut down the business essentially,
Yes.
right? How did that like affect your position in the company? And was it like at that point you decided to move on to Uber?
I worked well with Chinese. I never had a problem with
Okay.
Chinese, right? They gave me a promotion. I went from director to senior director. I was the only senior director at the time in the company, right? So it was like, yeah, it was great. Everyone had seen how much I contributed. Whether it was the Nigerians or it was the Chinese, they kind of like valued me tremendously. So I never even left because I wasn't valued,
Yeah.
right? And I was managing the entire country from a point of view of like with Alan. All Right became a thing across 18 cities. It was over 1 million trips a week. Then Lagos Operation financed everything because the P&L of Lagos was a asset financing product layered on top of the ride-hailing product. Because you can't make money from a 200 naira trip where you're taking 10%, which is just 20 naira, right? But you can make money. You can make money there. It just has to be a lot of millions of trips, right? But you can make
Right,
a lot
right.
more money if the assets that the rider is using and they are paying almost 100% interest on that assets,
Or yeah.
right? And so when Lagos got shut down and we tried to remove a lot of the incentives, there was a lot of chaos across. Also because there were a lot of misaligned incentives before we removed the incentives for the customers. And that got shut down. And then, we just focused on OPay itself and OWealth. OWealth then became a thing. Danvi launched OWealth. So Danvi, when he couldn't figure out OFood, he was moved to OPay business. Then he suggested a thing product called OWealth, which is actually a fantastic thing. Fantastic idea. That grew like wildfire. I think at one point, yeah, it was paying out 500 billionaire, even way before like any savings products was paying out 100 billionaire in Nigeria.
Interesting.
But all of that experience that one had to deal with managing products, managing engineering, managing operations, managing government relations, all at the same time, and managing reconciliation of a business that was growing that fast. You would come out of that a better entrepreneur,
I agree.
right?
That's like a crash course.
It's a crash course to building the company. It's like you'd be seeing everything in real time, the chaos. I think by the time I left, the thing had like consumers had over 2-3 million consumers on OPay, over 200,000 agents on OPay. So it was a really big product, right? I think it was about 8 million by the time I left. 8 million users, I remember, on the bike thing. And so by that time, my stock options were supposed to have been issued. And when it wasn't issued, and I've been asking over the 3 years, and they still just kept moving the dates, the goalpost. And I was like, you know what? Bye, guys. I'm going.
Wait,
So I left.
you left without your stock options?
Yeah, I left without my stock options. I left because my stock options was not issued. And they just kept telling the Nigerian founding team the same story. So I was like, if they're going to keep going, there was no reason. What they wanted to do was they kept increasing our salaries. So my salary by the time I was leaving was like maybe like 60 million or whatever at the time. Huh?
Per annum?
Yeah.
Is that per month?
Per annum with a
Okay.
massive bonus. But we're talking about 2020. Think about that at that time.
Yeah.
2019-ish. Yeah, 2019.
That's a lot of money at the time, yeah.
Yeah, that was a lot of money at the time, right? And I didn't even spend this money because I was almost on a trip. OPay was paying all my hotel bills. So I was almost in another city every other month. So it was not, so I left and I called up, and I said I was leaving OPay. And I saw this job at Uber. Can you help me? And he kind of like introduced me to the guy so that I could go through the interview process. I went through the interview process and I got the job. While doing the job, as a country manager for Uber, the city got shut down, which kind of like set the tone for me. It was kind of like a bit depressing for me that I was supposed to be country manager for a ride-hailing business and there's no ride to, you know. So I just spent a lot of my free time on LemFi. It was supposed to be a stock trading app. If people remember clearly, Robinhood was the big thing.
Yeah, Robinhood took off during the pandemic. I remember correctly.
Yes.
It's like,
Robinhood was a big thing then. And the idea was, could we build a digital banking app where stock trading was the center of how we acquired a different segment of customers, which is going to be a bit of premium customers, right? Maybe people who earned about $160, $200 a month. And so I spent a lot of time talking to DriveWealth. I even got to the stage of getting their contract, their terms and conditions. And then we built a small P&L on the pricing scheme of DriveWealth, and it just didn't make sense. They'd expected to pay per month per customer that the account was created. It just had all this weird billing thing that they did, that anyone who was using DriveWealth for stocks trading app was basically making money for DriveWealth.
Interesting.
So we said we're not going to go to do that, right? And Alpaca had not become a thing at the time, or wasn't big enough at the time, or was not even considering Africa. And the other guys that existed also had a weird billing thing, right? So I was like, you know what, let's leave these guys. So we ended up with money remittance. And so I went online and started looking for how to get a license. This was even before we had built the app. And I found a guy on the internet. And I said, hey guy, can you get us a license? He's like, yeah, but I charge you 19,000 pounds or something like that. I was like, yeah, okay, that's fine. Give me your account. And I wired money to him. We'd not even raised money at the time. I just sent him the money. This is a UK license. It was supposed to be an SPI, small payments institution license. I wired the guy this money, and I was like, oh, by the way, what about Canada? How do I get a license there? It's like, oh, by the way, and when you're hiring this type of consultants, you spend a lot of time talking to them on the call, right? And so different conversations come up. And I was like, by the way, Canada is a lot easier if you are considering that. I looked at the market size there, it was so small. I was like, yeah, it's small, but it's a lot easier. You can just apply online. I was like, what do you mean I can apply? He's like, yeah, you can just fill the form and you get a license almost a week later. I'm like, what are you talking about? Because if I'm coming from Nigeria, that's not how you get licenses. You go to the bank. So
you have to go inside,
go
and talk to them in person.
The guy's like, no, in Canada, you just submit and in a week you get FinTrack, which is almost a private entity that issues licenses. So the incentive is to issue licenses. I still didn't believe it. So he connected me to this lawyer guy in Canada, or this consultant, and the guy built our compliance program. And I said, yeah, this is what you need. By the way, go on this website and apply by yourself. I'm like, what are you talking about? Apply. It's like, you know what? Can you help me apply? And it's like, yeah, I'll charge you, but like, I don't need to do this for you. You can just do it yourself and you get it. I just couldn't believe it. I decided to pay an extra amount of money. I don't remember. I think I paid $5,000 or $6,000. But remember, we'd not raised money. So all of this was out of pocket from savings.
OPay and Uber savings.
Yes.
What about Ryan? Had he quit OPay at the time too?
Ryan was consulting for another company in Norway.
Okay.
Right? And he wasn't so sure he wanted to do it. So it took a bit of time for him to agree to do it. And then when he agreed to do it, he was like, yeah, we'll just do, I'll do a couple of hours in a week. But he never got paid. He was like, you know what, I'm going to do this with you, but like, you don't have to pay me. Let's just try to figure this out. And so we were both not getting paid, but he couldn't leave his job, right? He has 2 kids and all this. I mean, I have kids, but like, yeah. And so he was doing that gig and doing Lemonade Finance at the time. That's what it was called, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And to our surprise, we got the Canadian license. Like, yo, we got this license and we're so excited. And then the question was, how do we get a gateway in Canada? Because apparently in Canada, it's easy to get a license, extremely difficult to get a banking partner or a payment gateway. We reached out to Flutterwave and said, could we use Flutterwave International Processing API, International Cards Processing API? And by this time, we had now raised. So by the time the license in Canada came out, we built the first version of the product. We used the license to create a pitch deck to say we were raising $500K. we ended up raising $600,000 thanks to like OO. OO was a strong part of that fundraising process. And also a huge part of the strategy sessions, product sessions, and a lot of all the other sessions that happened before. You know what? O was one that said to go and talk to Ryan to bring him on board. I still remember clearly. It was like, we don't want your product guy, you're an engineer. You need a co-founder because YC likes startups that have two founders. That's the right number.
Yeah.
You know?
That's a smart advice.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, great. Then I spoke to Ryan. And that's how Ryan joined. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like we got the license, we used Flutterwave. Payment would fail because the Mastercard gateway or whatever Flutterwave was connected to at the time, the MID of Flutterwave or that was being used to process those transactions was labeled as acquiring MID from Africa. As the
What does that
customers,
mean?
that means that the issuing bank in Canada that issued the card the customer is trying to use on our website can flag it as high risk to say this person did not say that they are in Nigeria. Why is this request coming in from Nigeria?
Coming from Nigeria.
And they block that transaction. And sometimes they will send the customer an SMS to say, did you want to take this transaction? And if the customer responds with yes in the SMS, the next time they try to use the card on their app, it will
It's not going to work.
No, it will work.
Oh, it will work.
If they say no in the text message, then it won't work.
I see.
Right? And so we'll call a lot of our customers and say they should reply or they should call their bank to approve that transaction to go through. And we'll give them like $5 or $10. And if it's like 10 Canadian dollars was a great deal, then I was like, yeah, they'll call the bank, they'll approve it, and the transactions will go through. Some of them will be my friends' friends that my friend told to use the product because we're friends. Some of them were like people I went to school with. And that's kind of like how we started not up to 6 months into all of that, the UK license got issued. Yeah, remember, we had the UK license guy who introduced us to Canadian license guy. Canadian license came out in a week or two. But the UK guy had paid him and he had continued working. Right?
So it came out much later?
It came out much later. UK got launched in Q3 2021, right?
And you guys launched the UK business and, you start scaling from there after the license?
Then everything started growing super fast.
Was there any point, up until now, that LemFi, you thought LemFi might fail, right?
Almost every year.
Why is that? What happens almost every year?
Almost every year.
Are you serious? That's interesting. Okay.
I'm telling you, almost every year. What are you talking about? So at some point now, I tell my friends, I feel like I'm immune to bad news. If somebody tells me the house I'm in now is about to collapse, I'll be like, yeah, let it collapse first. Thank you for the information.
Are you serious?
I'll be like, yeah,
okay.
Okay, let me see it collapse first before I run outside. And so like almost every year, there would be one thing or the other, or multiple things, actually multiple things. In 2021, there was a lot of central bank issues. In 2022, there was a huge chargeback issue in the UK, I think. In 2023, there was another issue where there was like multiple regulators. Yeah. In 2023 was Bank of Ghana and a bunch of other things. 2024, so there's always something when you're doing a startup. It's a very
especially fintech one in emerging markets and like in Africa, right? So like how did you balance the hyper growth that you guys were, achieving and regulatory compliance in these markets?
The entire company is built on blood and sweat of a lot of people. This is the truth. Many people had sleepless nights. The type of attention that building anything meaningful requires, and a lot of people don't like to be honest with this on the internet, because they might think they're going to get canceled or whatever, or backlash. It's just immense. It's not the typical 9-to-5 job. Because the odds are already against you. You're trying to go in a space where there's like Remitly, World Remits,
exactly.
Like they've got a lot of engineers. They've got a lot of really smart people.
But they have the money for it too.
They've raised a lot more money. You cannot walk the same pace as much as they do.
So you have to go faster.
1 month or 2 months to build a feature. You should have it in a week or a day or 2 days, because your customers will now start talking about you're the only one that has it. And that could be the vector that is responsible for virality in that community. And so speed and intense work ethic is required to build anything meaningful. And this cuts across everything, whether it is to change your country, right? Or whether it is to build something, a company, whether it's to raise children, whatever it is actually requires some amount of intense focus, right? And so we had a lot of people to thank for it. They were used to working together at OPay. Like half of our team at the time, 80% of our team at the time was like former OPay guys and girls. It was like former OPay people, right? And they were already also used to the intensity of working that way, right?
So
And
yeah,
so,
it's like
yeah,
very important to have the same people that you probably worked with earlier to keep that intensity in another
yes, everyone
company.
was used to everyone's temperament, right? And style
Not that
of
you
work.
would hire someone that's working in a very chilled environment and trying to get them up to speed with, how things should be
Exactly.
done. Yeah.
In fact, you know what? The scale of the problems at Lemon Finance, as it was called at the time, was way chiller than OPay.
Wow. People must have been like, I don't know,
OPay was
very
literally
intense.
killing. So like you think about that tremendous focus by a group of people that had a much more strenuous and intense experience in the past, building a similar type of product was a lot easier. So then I tilt the probability, the odds that
In your
was against
favor.
us in favor of us.
So now
Um,
LemFi has raised like a couple of millions, like 90 something. If I remember, it's like, you're in, I think 17 plus 10 markets and 20 something receive. What has been the hardest market to crack for you guys and why? And also, what's one big misconception that people have about scaling a fintech or remittance business in emerging markets?
I think people think that regulators in emerging markets don't want progress, but it's not true. The regulators want progress. They just want compliant progress. But people think that, you know what, let me rephrase this. People think that the regulators in emerging markets are difficult or
Okay.
are not approachable. But the truth is that they are very reasonable and very thoughtful. You just have to present your case from a point of view, starting with compliance first and showing them how this is safe for everyone, whether for the industry or whether for the consumers, and show the robustness of your risk framework, right? And always communicate with them. Almost always communicate with them. That's something that I think many people have about the industry that is not necessarily true, at least from where I stand. Oftentimes now we approach regulators first. Like we almost go and meet the regulators in any of our markets first. It's like a regulator,
That's counter startup advice, which is typically innovation first and regulation comes after. But from what you're saying is like, approach regulators first before you probably start to make a move.
Yes. I mean, you can still go ahead and you can still start. No, get this right. I mean, we wouldn't do that now. You can approach a regulator and say, I want to do this X, Y, Z. Do not ask for permission in your approach at that time. Because if you ask for permission and they outrightly say no, and you go and start it, then you are in defiance of their response. And so you started on the bad foot,
Look for it here.
right? And so you don't want to do that. Instead, you can approach regulator, just discuss broadly about your thoughts and chip in the different things you want to do in a way where you're not asking for their blessing, but hearing their thoughts and providing counter arguments in a very reasonable way and create an open channel. Then go and start your thing, right?
That makes sense.
Now, what happens there is that when they hear about it, they know you, they have your WhatsApp, they have your email, and you say, hey, I just saw that you're doing X, Y, Z. What's going on, right? You can then be like, oh, we submitted an application for an approval and we're going through a pilot phase. We're not really taking up a lot of users. We're still just piloting and testing things out.
Kind of starts, meet them to tell them, okay, this is what you have in mind and see where their head is at, right?
Yes.
And based on that, you probably double down on what you're building.
Exactly. You know what?
If they say no.
They won't tell you the way to circumvent the law to achieve it. See, yeah, because they're brilliant people as well, right?
Yeah.
And you'll be surprised. Many people have approached them with the same problem that you have or trying to solve for the same case you're trying to solve for. Depends on the mood you meet them at. And they can be like, yeah, but is that guy not doing it this way and taking it this way? Then like, so if so if this one is done this way, is that all right? Yeah, within the framework of the law, it is acceptable. Stuff like that. You start to get that kind of feedback, right? And that's how we now look at regulators in Africa. In the West, we don't really need to meet regulators. What regulators in the West need is your risk framework, your compliance framework, your privacy policy framework, if it's in Europe, your GDPR framework, all that stuff well put together with a business plan and a forecast and capital, if capital is required, and people that are fit to be UBOs or even directors. You submit your documentation.
So no need for in-person
No, I never
conversations?
met any of the regulators, whether it is the UK or the US or the or Republic of Ireland, where we have our European license now. I never met any of them, even Canada, FinTrack. I've never seen any of them, anybody there. The only time I ever spoke to a regulator was a case officer from the FCA talking to us on Zoom call when we were getting our SPI to clarify a few questions. And these days, they don't even do Zoom call anymore. They just send you an email.
Do you think
clarify the question over
we
the
can get
email.
to that stage like in Africa where, our regulatory framework is, like the West, where you don't have to go in person, you can just do everything online or virtually?
I think we're getting there. We're getting there. There are a few countries, a few markets. For example, when we had the issue in Ghana and we later resolved it, all of our applications for license approvals in Ghana has been submitted online. You just submit online. We don't need to see them. The portal updates you with more questions that they need clarification on. You fill the questions online. Voila, you get your license.
Okay, interesting.
So that's happening in Ghana now, right? I think it's happening in Kenya. I think so. I think it's happening in Kenya now to some extent. If you already have a license and you want additional permissions, you don't need to see the regulator.
Okay.
So that's
That's
progress.
Yeah.
Right?
I hear you. Yeah.
And I think it's also happening in Nigeria,
Okay.
especially in this current central bank regime. There are people that are getting licenses that have never seen any regulator before.
Interesting.
They just submit it at the CBN. They make sure they get a consultant that has filled everything, that has done it before. They make sure everything, all the documentation they need is present, and they get an approval. That has been happening in the last 8 to 10 months at the Central Bank of Nigeria.
Okay. Just moving on from regulation, right? And I think I asked earlier, the toughest market or hardest markets you've had to crack, right? Both from the send and receive side, being a remittance business.
Expanding in big emerging markets, right? Focusing on Pakistan, doing Bangladesh, Brazil, Philippines, Indonesia. Going to those big markets that have as many immigrants in the West as required, and they still have a significant remittance pricing problem, right? So they have to have large immigrants in the West and have a pricing problem.
So not all markets have that?
Not all markets have that. Markets where the pricing problem has been solved for them. For example, sending money between the UK and Poland is not a problem. There's no price problem there. There's no arbitrage anywhere. It's very simple, 0.2% take rate for everybody, and you move on. Sending money between the UK and France, what are you solving there, right? There are 300, 400 players solving that in a very easy manner. And oftentimes, the users can even go to their banks. And those group of immigrants are not even price sensitive. And 10 basis points is not their problem. Do you get what I mean? Because also those immigrants exist in different income brackets, right? The sub-Saharan African immigrants and are mostly the ones in the lowest income bracket, I think followed by a few of the Asian countries immigrant, right? But the European immigrants are not, right? The Saudi immigrants are not. The Japanese immigrants are not. So what are you trying to solve there, right? So it's not all the markets that have those key dynamics, right? You just have to look for those key variables where the problems do exist for them.
And that's where LemFi is predominantly now.
And that's what we're doing. That's what we're focusing on. We want to be the
platform. Now it's, targeting more Asian communities in the UK, Europe, and US.
Exactly.
But further down the line, I think when we had the discussion at the time, you kind of mentioned corridors along Saudi, India, Dubai, all those other corridors, right? And tapping into them maybe 5-10 years from now. But like you just mentioned, those guys don't really have pricing problems, right? So it's wouldn't you run out of, markets that have pricing problems to grow?
When you do that, when that happens, then there is product diversification. There are many ways to grow a business, right? There is market expansion, there's product diversification. And so at different points in the life cycle of the company, we would use different mechanisms to keep growing.
Okay. If you
right?
had
But
like,
remember, there will also
yeah,
always be new immigrants moving to those countries, especially skilled immigrants. You're now going to get a lot better where it's skilled immigrants that are moving. Because skilled immigrants are usually in a higher income bracket, more
hmm
digital savvy, right? That means like the likes of
yeah,
Western Union, MoneyGram will probably lose out because they never figured out digitization properly. But the very digital first platforms will gain more users and will become the de facto products for those users.
interesting. Ridwan, let me ask this. If you had to like 10x growth, right, tomorrow, what would you focus on first? I mean, just probably an advice founders. Would it be products, people, or partnerships for remittance business?
I think next growth is hard for us at this point. I think if
I
we
mean,
do
not
it,
okay, like if you were to start, LemFi all over again.
or if I were to start LemFi all over again,
Or you know
I
what?
would
Maybe
not.
we can take this two
If I
ways,
were to
right? If
start a company all over again, not the fintech.
okay, let's backtrack. 10x growth is still possible because you probably want to be a $1 billion company, right? And you have to
Yeah, we
10x
don't
your
need to
growth to
10x to
achieve
become a
that.
billion dollar company at the moment. At
Sorry?
a 1.5x to become a billion dollar company right now, where we are, the stage where we are, a 2x growth or 1.5x growth, we would be that a billion dollar company.
Is this in terms of what, valuation of revenues?
Revenue. We're very principled business people, so we do not focus on valuation. Ryan and I have made sure never to focus on valuation from the start of this business. We've always focused on the revenue, gross margin, and the sustainability of that business.
So what you're
Right?
saying right now is if you double your revenues, you'll be a
Yes.
$1 billion business technically. I
Yes.
need to do some
If we come.
calculations on that. Yeah.
So like, you know, doubling our revenue in itself is a hard, complex problem right now. Because
Sorry?
doubling our revenue is our goal right now. It's like, how do we go 100% growth, 150% growth, 200% growth? Those are sort of things we're aiming for. And so if we wanted to do that, we need at least 3, 4 key big Asian markets to do that are growing just as fast, right? And so you would see our consistent and immense focus on Asia,
Mm-hmm. I hear
right?
you.
And that's why,
Okay.
right?
So would you focus
Um,
more on partnerships, people, or product? Just back to my question. Or is it all of them at the same time?
growth, growing the growth
Yeah.
team, growing the growth
So
team.
people.
Yeah, people. Some of the partnerships maybe, but I think we have a global partnership for payments in view already. We've had that since last year because we've always thought that we would eventually become much more than just sub-Saharan Africa, right?
Yeah.
So it would be people. The focus now would be people.
Interesting. Let's talk about like, your fundraising processes or strategies. I think one question I wanted to ask was how do investor expectations, right, differ from local VCs and international? I know like the first seed round you guys had was mostly local, but since then it's been mostly international, investments. So, how do those expectations differ? And, founders looking to raise from both like types, like profile types, like, how should they go about it? And what should they expect that those investors expect from them?
I think in the beginning, and I'm far off this problem now, so my thought process might not be the best, right?
Okay.
I think in the beginning, they want to see a founder that has the credentials, especially the local investors, right? Do you have the credential to somewhat be able to pull this off, right? Like, are you the guy? The people know you in the community as the guy that makes things happen. Do you get that sort of thing? And then also they want to also figure out that, is this business going to be big? So you have to sell that dream that the business can be really big.
How did you set it when the remittance market at the time seemed crowded?
You know what? We just thought, I don't think anybody believed us. I don't think we believed ourselves. You know what? And you would see it from like a lot of
That's
people who
funny.
write stuff. Like, I could tell you, half the people didn't believe that it was possible. Even I don't think we believed it. It was just like there was no way to go back, and we just could continue
Hello, are you
going.
there?
I don't think we didn't believe ourselves, but I tell you we did. We just kept saying whatever we needed to say. It was also our first experience of raising money, so we just said anything we needed to say at the time. Fundamentally, we're not people who will steal companies' money or like spend it on frivolous things. So even after we raised $600,000, the year after that, we still never got paid. Like the entire year after that, Like I never got paid where I never got paid. And at this time as well, the company was owing me $50,000 because I'd be paying salaries, remember, and I'd paid compliance people. So when we raised 600, we just said anything we needed to say, but we never got paid as founders. Like we never got paid any salary, even with the 600,000. We still made sure that everyone who worked for company still got underpaid. The head of engineering at the time left his Andela job that was paying him $3,000, which was what Andela was paying at the time, to come and be collecting 700,000 there at LemFi, right? And we said, no more than 700,000, sorry, my guy, right? But you have to do this full time, you know? But he was that guy. We'd done things together before. Edward wasn't getting paid. Ryan wasn't getting paid. I wasn't getting paid. But we had $600,000 in the bank. So majority of the money was not even going on payroll. It was going on marketing and figuring out licenses and stuff like that. We only started getting paid when we raised $3 million post YC. So I then started getting paid because by that time I'd exhausted all my savings. It was like,
No way. Are you
I'm
serious?
telling you, it was tough. It was tough.
So you're living life on the edge.
I was, and then I started getting paid like $3,000 or 1.5 or 2.5. I don't remember how much, but I was getting paid some amount of money. Then after we raised the 3 million, Ryan made sure the company returned the money I'd borrowed, like the 50K I'd spent on all that stuff, because he said, "Don't worry, let's keep going. We'll write it as a loan." Right? So he did the documentation to write it as a loan to the company, and then got the company to pay me back that money.
That's
This is like,
that's a good payback, I guess.
yes. So in the beginning, we did not know what to tell investors. We just said anything that we thought was a good sales pitch. But I think the key factor there is that local investors in Nigeria rely more on credentials of the founder and what everyone else is saying about that founder in the community. At the seed stage or post YC is about how fast you're growing and how well you can pitch to focus the attention of the listeners on demo day on how fast you're growing and how important the problem you're solving is, or how important the problem you're solving will become, right? Those two key things are like super important. Series
That
A
makes sense.
is about proving that you found product market fit. You have fundamentally good PM and showing that you can become $1 billion company or a $500 million company, whatever the next 5x is, show the path towards it. Series B is about having really good economics, like your economics work, your EBITDA makes sense, right? And showing that you can become 3x, 4x business
From where you are at the point.
where you are, but your economics have to work in Series B. It's not really just about like, oh yeah, we're growing X, but like your gross margins are negative. Like that's bad. That's a bad business, right? And so show fundamentally good economics, disciplined entrepreneurs that can 3-4x their current business from where they are at the moment in 2
All
years.
right. What's like the hardest pitch meeting you've ever had, and what
Wow.
did you learn from it?
I think our Series A was the hardest.
How much was that again?
So our $30 million, I think, right? A was $30 million, but we raised it in A1 and A2. Series A1 and A2. So it was in two different parts. The first one was $15 million, and the second one was also $15 million. Both Series A
So the first E was the hardest.
was the hardest. It was the hardest. It was like really hard. It was really hard. It was so hard. We started flying around to meet investors to like drill down on our pitch, like we're the guys to invest in. You should do this. And I remember Ryan and I being on the ground floor of Left Lane's building just prior to our meeting with them to pitch our, to do a face-to-face meeting with them when they decided to progress with our conversation. It was a pizza restaurant, and we're like running through all of our lines, all of our questions, the answers, the way we should answer them, who would go first, who would go next, all that stuff. I would pitch it and like, if you don't know it, just throw it at me, let me take the question, and then we go back and forth, stuff like that. And you know what? I was in Maryland then. So I flew from Maryland to New York. Ryan flew from Oslo, Norway to New York only after a day's notice. It's just like they asked to see us like 2 days later. And I was like, oh, we're going to make it. It was Ryan flew in, I flew in. We got in a night before
for
morning,
the morning, yeah.
And it's like,
Wow.
yeah. And then we pitched to them. Anne was there, and fantastic guy at Left Lane. This was like the real big shots at the fund, right? Alicia was there at the time. And then we pitched to them and we left the place and we're like, we didn't know whether because Dan will grill you Dan was really good at grilling people, and he knew the details because he had invested in a lot of fintech companies. He participated in the board meetings of a lot of fintech companies, so he knew the details.
The
So he
nitty-gritties, yeah.
grilled us, yeah. And we got out thinking that we'd lost this particular round again, and we're like, okay, let's go and continue elsewhere,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
And we just
Pitch to
yeah,
other
we just kept
investors.
pitching. And I think I was at a restaurant with a family friend at the time. She was celebrating her birthday, and we'd come to this Chinese restaurant. I don't even know, in Maryland. It was like in Clinton. And I got a call from Matthew Miller at Left Lane, and I went out to take the call. And it's like, we've decided to make you guys an offer. These are the terms. I remember like putting my phone up and screaming. I just jumped in, super
In the
excited.
restaurants outside.
Yeah, I stepped out to take the call. I
Oh,
was
okay,
like,
okay, okay, okay.
we did it. And then he gives me the price, like terms. I'm like, yeah, you know what? I can't make a decision. Let me call my co-founder. You know, I'm sure my co-founder would be fine if I said yes at the time.
I know, right?
I was like, yeah.
I just did
Um,
that. I just need to do it for,
you know,
for
so I
yes,
called up
courtesy, I
Ryan.
guess.
Exactly. And I called up Ryan, and we kept talking. I was like, you know what? We're gonna give him counter offer. We can't just give him like that. So we
Yeah,
gave
yeah,
them
yeah.
the counter offer, and we went back and forth, and they agreed to the counter offer. They're very reasonable people.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's nice.
And then they sent us a term sheet. We signed, and we went through an extensive due diligence. My God. At some point, we thought everything was like, was not happening again. It was like this due diligence was like much more than the time we had spent fundraising.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, this your last round came out pretty like, fast. I think when we talked, you
yes.
said it was about 4 or 5 months.
Yeah. We
Compare
concluded all
that
of
to
that
like
in like,
up to a year or so.
it was like, you know what? It took almost 6 months. Everything that happened, like the fundraising itself, maybe took like 2 months, because we were also not well known. We didn't have the best warm intros. It was our first time, right?
Mhm.
Doing raising an A. We had data room set up, but it wasn't as comprehensive as they wanted it to be, right? But the B, we already knew the way the game was played, right? Or like what was important. We knew what was important. So before we even emailed any of the investors, we made sure the data room was done.
Yeah.
Everything was ready. We made sure the deck was done. We had a lot of our investors preview the deck and give us feedback on it. And then
Okay.
we had Left Lane do a lot of the warm intros through senior partners at the fund. So it was like friends telling another friend in another fund to check out this company.
Yeah, I see why that would be easier compared to the
Yeah.
first.
Yeah, Left Lane is an amazing fund, and they do help a lot. So they spend a lot of their time in the details, and they spend a lot of their time in contributing tremendous value
Mhm.
in the things that matter, right? So they helped a lot in putting that round together, right? Because initially they suggested for them to lead the round again. I'm like, man, let's go outside and race.
Oh, for the B. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So let's go outside and raise, right? So we spent about a month, 1 week talking to investors, or a month, 2 weeks talking to investors,
Okay.
for
Interesting.
both the first calls and follow-on calls. And then, we finally met, Island Europe, amazing guys as well. They like getting in down to the details as well. A bit different DNA from like American funds, but that's European funds for you. They're a lot different. And so we spent a couple of time going to their office or getting to know them over dinner. And then so we ended up like with like I think 3 times shit. And then we took Island Europe's term sheet because
Nice.
they spend the most time on the important details.
Wait, for LemFi now, right? I mean, you mentioned earlier, and just having reached this Series B and trying to scale into more Asian communities, right, in the West, what is like the bigger vision, right? I mean, you've talked about remittances, and apart from broadening the pie, you also probably want to, build other products. I'm just even thinking, the origins of LemFi in the first place, like you said, will stop trading. So are we going to see LemFi going back to that? What other kind of products, can we expect from you guys?
I think for us, you have to think about it from a vision perspective. We want to be a niche neobank for the global south. And that encompasses a lot. The right way to call it the full stack financial service for the global south. And so when you think about what that encompasses, that is beyond remittance,
I agree.
right? And so within this year, we're going to do a lot of product announcements that are outside of remittance that are also quite interesting and that serves customers in a very unique way, right? In such a way that we're like the best people to solve that particular problem for our customers, right? And that's sort of like what we're going to spend our time doing.
So I'm not getting like a scoop here and that.
Ryan
No
would kill me.
problem.
Ryan would kill me. Like, think about it as
Okay.
a full stack financial service for the global south.
Okay. Fair enough. I can work with that. But just, to tie into what's it called? The current wave of fintech these days, right? Stablecoin payments, crypto and whatnot. So like, how do you see that playing out for the future of cross-border payments? And maybe is it something you guys would, at some points, tap into at LemFi?
I think stable coins has come to stay. Crypto has come to stay. There's no doubt about that. There's still questions about regulations. For us, like I said, we're at the point where we need to go by what our regulators want. Today, we don't interact with it. We don't interact with stable coins. We don't interact with crypto or whatever sort
Digital
of
assets, yeah.
digital asset, right? But we're looking out for it and we're looking at how the regulators in the markets where we operate want to define the future of finance with it. And when we see a positive direction, we would then start making steps to see what opportunities exist for us, right? And so, like, if I go to a regulator and I'm chatting with them regularly, like I talked about a few minutes ago, and and they're like, they are thinking about it, they think it's a great thing, and they think they want to support it. That becomes an indication for us to start getting ready for it.
Okay.
Until that happens, we won't. We will just stay away.
Fair enough. I mean, I don't know if, there is some catching up to be done if, for instance, another player decides to tap into it, right?
I
Like,
think
how you think, if, for
I don't
instance, like
worry.
you guys
I
are
don't
like
worry
2, 3 years late, won't it affect the trajectory of the
about those
growth?
things. But I
Okay.
think the way we see it is a bit different. Whoever has the largest number of active customers will be and has the highest share of trust from its customers will win in any segment they decide to go to.
Okay.
So if you start crypto business or whatever you want to do, and you only have 100,000 customers, and LemFi has 5 million customers, and of your 100,000 customers, your customers are a subset of our customers. If we launch that thing that you have, we can really make it available to 5 million people.
What if it's Zeps doing something like that before you guys?
No, but Zeps never changed along the way. They never adjusted to competition.
I
That's
see.
different. Do you understand? That's a lot different. Like it's like Cash App when they launched crypto in the US after having like over 100 million customers or so. The crypto volume became bigger than almost everyone else's crypto volume. That's how to think about products. When OPay launched OWealth, I can tell you categorically, it had the largest amount of savings as a digital product. And I think it still
More than a
does.
piggy vest.
I don't know. I don't want to mention any names. I don't know the numbers,
Okay,
but I
okay,
can
yeah.
tell you. I can tell you as at 2021 when I left. I left 2020. So 2021, Wealth at 400 billion naira
Payouts or savings?
in savings. Like the balance sheet was about 400 billion naira.
That's crazy volumes, man.
Exactly. Today, I know it's about 1 trillion naira. So if you launch another product as a startup or whatever, and OPay launches it, that's 40 million customers that can actually interact with that
Just
product
go into
almost
it.
immediately.
Yeah.
Except they launch a worse product.
Okay. So for you, are you saying like you have the customer base to,
The focus for us now, until there's clarity on a lot of things around regulation, to grow our customer base.
but yeah, you know what? I think that's pretty much like, questions I had in mind. This is actually more interesting than just a normal fundraise conversation. I think
It
so.
is.
What
It
do you
is.
think?
There's a lot to share. I'm telling you, there's so
Yeah.
much.
A rapid fire, round of questions. This is just, outside of OPay, LemFi and whatnot. So if you weren't building LemFi today, what would you be doing?
Trading the stock market, honestly, like building like algorithms for trading the US stock market. That's what I'd be doing.
Interesting. Why do I just feel like stock trading will be the next product or next set of products that you guys
No,
will
no, no,
launch?
it's not even in the roadmap. But
But
like
you have
building
an affinity
algorithms.
towards it.
Huh?
Like you have like an affinity towards
Yeah, I've
stock
always had an
trading.
affinity for algorithmic trading, even way before like all this AI stuff. So I used to do like a course back in school on image processing, right? So like all these things happening in AI is quite exciting for me because back then it was like, it was a different thing.
Yeah.
And so like that's kind of like what I've been spending my time on. Like if I was not working, I'd just be writing algorithms to trade the stock market. And like, yeah.
That sounds like a very nice side project to have.
It is. I just don't have the bandwidth
Okay.
yet, but like trust me, when I
For it,
do,
yeah,
that's what I'll be
you
doing
do
with my
that.
time. Yeah.
Okay. What's another question, for I think I have in mind is the biggest mistake you feel like early stage fintech founders make? I mean, you're not an early stage fintech founder, right? But like, if you were just like looking from the outside into the market and maybe also, compare it to when you were an early stage founder, what do you think like are the biggest mistakes that they make?
I don't think I can point at anything as the biggest mistake, but I can say a few things. Don't spend money raised on frivolous things. Do not, right? That's one. Don't. And I have a very strict definition of frivolous, right? So that second thing is don't spend too much time listening to everybody else, caring about the noise
Mm.
from the outside world.